The marble floors of the grand court always gleamed brightest in the late evening, when torchlight flickered against the ancient stone columns, and the air hung heavy with the scent of beeswax candles and cold stone. Ilara preferred this time, when the higher-ranking wolves had retired to their chambers, and she could scrub in silence, invisible as the shadows dancing across the vaulted ceilings above her. Her hands moved in practiced circles, raw and bleeding from the harsh lye soap. The scrub brush felt like lead in her grip. 17 hours of labor today, 4 hours of sleep last night, 17 more tomorrow. The cycle never ended, a wheel that turned and turned until she couldn't remember what it felt like to be anything other than exhausted. She paused, her reflection wavering in the polished marble beneath her knees. A hollow-eyed girl stared back at her, red gold hair escaping from beneath a stained servant's cap, grey dress hanging loose on a frame that had grown thinner each passing month. She barely recognized herself anymore. When had she become this ghost of a person? Her vision blurred. The brush slipped from her fingers, clattering against the stone with a sound that echoed through the empty court. She tried to pick it up, but her arm wouldn't obey. Her body had finally made the decision her mind couldn't. Ilara's knees buckled. She felt herself falling, slowly, inevitably, like a tree cut at its base. The cold marble met her feverish cheek, and instead of panic, she felt only relief. The blessed darkness rushed up to claim her, and she surrendered to it without resistance. In that space between consciousness and sleep, a fragment of memory surfaced, warmth, safety, small hands clutching something silver and precious, a woman's voice whispering urgently. Fire, screaming. Then nothing but peace, the first she'd felt in 15 years. The grand court fell silent around her collapsed form. The torches continued their dance, the shadows lengthened, and Ilara knew nothing but stillness. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching. Heavy boots on marble, the distinctive sound of absolute authority, the rhythm of someone who had never known what it meant to tread carefully, to make oneself small. Alpha King Lysander had been walking the palace corridors for hours, as he did most nights when sleep refused to come. The nightmares were always worse in the darkness, visions of flames and failure that plagued him no matter how many years passed. So he walked, checking on his guards, his kingdom, anything to keep the memories at bay. He turned the corner into the grand court and froze mid-step. The scent hit him like a physical blow. Wild honeysuckle and moonflower, sweet and impossibly rare. His wolf stirred violently inside him, recognition sparking through every nerve. That scent shouldn't exist. It couldn't exist. The Omega royal line had been exterminated 15 years ago. He'd watched them die. But there was no mistaking it. Royal bloodline magic had a signature as unique as a fingerprint, and this one sang through the air like a ghost from his past. Every torch in the grand court seemed to burn brighter as his alpha presence filled the space. The very air grew heavy, thick with power that made the two guards at the far entrance drop immediately to one knee. Heads bowed in instinctive submission. Lysander's eyes found the source. A young woman lay collapsed on the marble floor 20 paces away, her body curled on its side, one small hand still reaching toward a fallen scrub brush. Red gold hair spilled from beneath her servant's cap, catching the torchlight and gleaming like molten copper. She wore the plain grey dress that marked the lowest servants, the fabric worn thin from washing. He moved closer, his boots silent now despite their weight. Something about the curve of her face made his chest tighten, the shape of her jaw, the shade of her hair, details he'd buried deep in his memory, details from a night 15 years ago when he'd failed in the most important task he'd ever been given. Lysander stopped beside her, looking down at the unconscious girl. Her breathing was shallow, her skin too pale. Dark circles shadowed her closed eyes. Her hands were raw and cracked, knuckles bleeding from harsh soap and endless labor. His jaw clenched. Someone in his palace had done this. Someone had worked this girl to the point of collapse. But that wasn't what made his heart thunder in his chest. It was the scent, growing stronger now, unmistakable. And it was the impossible possibility crystallizing in his mind with each passing second. Bring her to me. The command cut through the silence like a blade. 3 words, low and controlled, carrying absolute authority that made both guards jerk their heads up in shock. They stared at him, then at the collapsed servant, confusion and fear warring on their faces. Servants weren't brought to the king, especially not unconscious ones. Especially not for collapsing while working. "Your Majesty?" one of them ventured, his voice hesitant. Lysander's eyes never left the girl on the floor. His voice dropped to that dangerous register that meant he would not repeat himself. That meant obedience was not optional, but absolute. Now. The guards scrambled to their feet and rushed forward. They bent over Ilara's unconscious form, uncertain how to proceed, glancing at each other with wide eyes. Gently, Lysander added, and something in his tone made them handle her as if she were made of glass. One guard slid his arms beneath her shoulders, the other took her legs. As they lifted her, her head lolled against the first guard's shoulder, her body completely limp. Her fingers still curled slightly, as if she were still clutching the brush, even in unconsciousness. Lysander watched every detail. The way her breathing remained too shallow. The way she didn't stir even when moved. The exhaustion so complete that not even being carried by strangers could wake her. Then he saw it. As they adjusted their grip, something small and silver slipped from beneath the neckline of her dress. A pendant on a worn leather cord, swinging free as her body shifted. Lysander's heart stopped. Even from 10 paces away, even in the flickering torchlight, he recognized it. The royal crest of the moonshadow line, intricate and unmistakable. The same crest he'd seen on banners and seals and royal correspondence 15 years ago, before it had all burned to ash. The same crest that should have been destroyed with the rest of the royal family. "Take her to my private chambers," he said, his voice rough. "Immediately. Send for Dr. Theron." The guards didn't question him again. They simply obeyed, carrying their unconscious burden toward the king's wing of the palace with careful steps. Lysander followed, his mind racing. Part of him insisted this was impossible. The princess had died. He'd searched the ruins himself, had attended the memorial, had carried the guilt of his failure for 15 years. The girl died in that inferno. Everyone knew it. But his wolf knew differently. His instincts roared that he'd finally found what he'd been searching for all these years without even knowing he was looking. Word spread through the palace corridors like wildfire, whispered from servant to servant, guard to guard. The king had ordered an unconscious Omega servant brought to his private chambers. The king, who never showed interest in servants, who kept himself isolated and alone, had stopped his nightly walk to save a collapsed girl. In the lower servants' quarters, Mistress Vera heard the news and felt ice slide down her spine. The Omega who'd collapsed was one of hers, one she'd pushed harder than the others because the girl never complained, never fought back. If the king was angry about her condition, if he blamed Vera for working her too hard, the punishment would be severe. Other servants whispered different theories. Some thought the girl would be punished for sleeping on duty. Others believed she'd be dismissed entirely. A few looked at each other with envy, wondering what it meant that the king himself had noticed her. But none of them knew the truth. None of them could have guessed. The king's private chambers were a world away from anything Alara had ever known. Rich tapestries lined the walls, depicting battles and coronations in threads of gold and silver. A four-poster bed dominated one side of the room, draped in silk sheets the color of midnight. A massive fireplace crackled with warmth, casting dancing light across furniture carved from dark wood and polished to a gleam. The guards laid Alara gently on the bed, stepping back immediately, unsure what to do next. "Leave us," Lysander said. "Wait outside. Let no one enter except Dr. Theron." They bowed and retreated, closing the heavy door behind them. Lysander moved to the bed, looking down at the girl who lay utterly still against his silk sheets. She looked impossibly small there, impossibly fragile. Her servant's dress was a stark grey stain against the rich fabric. He reached down slowly, carefully, and lifted the pendant that lay against her chest. The silver was tarnished from years of wear, the leather cord frayed, but the crest was unmistakable. His fingers traced the intricate design, the crescent moon entwined with flowering vines, the symbol of the moon shadow royal line. The door opened. Dr. Theron entered, an older wolf with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen decades of service. He'd been the royal physician for the Moonshadow family before the massacre. He'd been the one to officially declare the entire bloodline dead. He took one look at the girl on the bed and stopped breathing. "Your Majesty," he whispered, "that's not possible." "Examine her," Lysander said quietly. "Tell me what you find." Dr. Theron approached slowly, as if approaching a ghost. His hands shook slightly as he checked her pulse, her breathing, her temperature. He examined her hands, noting the raw skin and bleeding knuckles. He pulled back her eyelids, checked her reflexes, listened to her heartbeat. When he finally stepped back, his face was grave. "She's been worked nearly to death, Your Majesty. Chronic exhaustion, malnutrition, dehydration. Another week of this, and her body would have simply given out entirely." Lysander's jaw clenched, rage simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "And the scent?" Dr. Theron closed his eyes. "Royal Omega bloodline magic. Unmistakable. Suppressed, somehow, but present." He opened his eyes, meeting Lysander's gaze. "Your Majesty, if this is who I think it is, if she somehow survived, someone hid her here, someone powerful enough to suppress her scent, to keep her hidden for 15 years. "Leave us," Lysander said. "Tell no one what you've seen. Not yet." Dr. Theron bowed and departed, leaving Lysander alone with the unconscious girl who might be a ghost made flesh. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat, the pendant still in his hand. For a long moment, he simply watched her breathe, shallow but steady. Then the memories came, unbidden and unavoidable. 15 years ago. He'd been 15 himself, a visiting alpha heir training with the elite guards of the Northern Kingdom's greatest ally. He'd been in the practice yards when the attack came. Explosions, screaming, the palace in chaos. His commander had grabbed him, shoved a bundle into his arms. A baby, wrapped in silk, crying. "The princess! Get her to safety! The hidden passage behind the throne room, go!" He'd run, fought through smoke and flames and attacking wolves. Made it to the passage. Descended into darkness with the crying infant clutched against his chest. Then the explosion. the passage collapsing, the force throwing him backward, the baby ripped from his arms. Darkness and pain and the certainty that he'd failed. When he'd woken days later, they'd told him the princess was dead, the entire royal family dead. And he'd believed it because he'd felt her torn from his grasp, because no one could have survived that collapse. But looking at this girl now, at the shape of her face and the crest around her neck and the scent of royal magic, he knew the impossible truth. She'd survived. Someone had pulled her from those ruins, had hidden her, suppressed her magic, raised her as a servant, had kept the last heir of the Moonshadow line alive by making her invisible. And he'd been walking these same halls for years, never knowing she was here, suffering, alone. Lysander's hands tightened on the pendant. He'd failed to protect her once. He wouldn't fail again. On the bed, Ilara's eyes began to flutter. Her breathing changed, consciousness slowly returning after the deep, dreamless sleep of utter exhaustion. Her eyelids lifted slowly, heavily, as if they weighed more than she could bear. The first thing she saw was firelight dancing on a ceiling far higher and more ornate than any she'd ever slept beneath. Then her gaze shifted and found him. The fierce Alpha King, sitting beside her bed, watching her with storm-grey eyes that held an intensity she couldn't understand. His long black hair fell past his shoulders, partially pulled back to reveal a face that was beautiful and terrible at once. He wore the formal attire of royalty, ornate shoulder armor catching the light, leather braces on his forearms, everything speaking of power and authority. And he was holding something silver in his hand, something that belonged to her. Ilara's eyes widened. She tried to sit up, panic flooding through her exhausted body. The softness beneath her was the first thing that registered. Silk sheets, smooth and cool against her skin in a way that felt almost alien. Ilara's eyes had opened to firelight and ornate ceilings, to warmth she'd never known, and the scent of sandalwood and leather filling the air around her. Her body ached, but differently than usual. Not the sharp, burning pain of overworked muscles and raw hands, but the deep, heavy ache of a body that had finally been allowed to rest. The weight of actual blankets pressed against her, real fabric that existed for comfort rather than mere function. Then memory crashed through the haze. The Grand Court, collapsing. The king's voice commanding that she be brought to him. Panic flooded her veins like ice water. She tried to sit up, her weak body protesting immediately. Where was she? Why was she in a bed instead of being punished? Servants who fell asleep during their duties were dismissed at best, flogged at worst. And she was in someone's chamber, somewhere far too rich, far too warm to be anywhere a servant belonged. Easy. You're safe here. The voice was deep and controlled, but beneath the authority she heard something unexpected, something almost gentle. Ilara's gaze snapped to the source. The Alpha King sat in a chair beside the bed, Shippy, still dressed in his formal court attire. The ornate shoulder armor caught the firelight, his leather braces dark against his forearms. His long black hair was partially braided, falling past his shoulders in a way that somehow made him look both regal and dangerous. But it was his eyes that trapped her. Storm grey and intense, studying her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Not anger, though she'd expected fury. Not the predatory interest she'd seen in some of the higher-ranking wolves who sometimes looked at Omega servants with hunger. This was something else entirely, something that looked almost like recognition, like hope. Her instincts screamed at her to lower her gaze, to make herself smaller, to submit. Your Majesty, forgive me. I didn't mean to collapse. I didn't mean to shirk my duties. Please. I'll work twice as hard. I'll make up for the lost time. I just needed a moment and I shouldn't have. I'm so sorry. Please don't dismiss me. I have nowhere else to go, and I'll do better. I promise I'll do better. Just please. What is your name? The question cut through her rambling apology. There was weight in it, need, as if her answer mattered more than it possibly could. Elara, Your Majesty. Just Elara. I'm a servant in the lower palace. I clean the grand court and the southern corridors, and sometimes the kitchens when they need extra hands. And I'm sorry I fell asleep. I didn't mean to. I was just so tired, and He held something up, and her words died in her throat. The pendant. Her pendant. Silver catching the firelight. The intricate crest, visible even from where she lay. Where did you get this? Elara's hand flew instinctively to her neck, finding the familiar weight missing. Her heart lurched. That pendant was all she had, the only piece of her past, the only connection to a mother she barely remembered. It was my mother's, Your Majesty. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. The only thing I have from her. She died when I was 3. Fever took her. Your mother, Lysander repeated, his tone careful, measured. What did she tell you about it? Elara's throat tightened. Why did he care? Why did any of this matter? She told me, before she died, that it was just a copy, something pretty she'd found somewhere. She said I should keep it to remember her by, but that it wasn't valuable or important. Just a trinket. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. She'd worn that pendant every day for 15 years, hidden beneath her servant's dress where no one could see it, where Mistress Vera couldn't confiscate it as unnecessary ornamentation. It was the only proof she'd ever been loved by anyone. It's all I have to remember her by, she whispered. Lysander leaned forward slightly, his intensity increasing. What else do you remember about her? About your early childhood? The question felt strange, too personal, too probing. But he was the king, and she had no right to refuse to answer. Nothing, Your Majesty. Just impressions, really. Warmth. Safety. A voice singing, though I can't remember the words in the melody. Then she was gone, and I was alone. Ilara's hands twisted in the silk sheets. They took me to the palace orphanage, the place where they raise children to become servants. I was told I was nobody, that my mother had been nobody, that I should be grateful to have work and a place to sleep. She'd been 3 years old, grieving and confused, and they'd given her a grey dress and a scrub brush and told her to be useful. Lysander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Every word she spoke seemed to confirm something for him, though she couldn't imagine what. Do you dream, Elara? The question was so unexpected that she blinked at him, confused. Your Majesty? At night, when you sleep. Do you have dreams? Nightmares? It was an odd thing for a king to ask a servant, but something in his expression told her this mattered, that her answer would mean something she didn't understand yet. Sometimes, Your Majesty. She hesitated, then continued. Always the same dream, fire and smoke everywhere. Someone screaming my name, but not Elara. A different name I can never quite hear. Arms pushing me into darkness, into cold stone passages. The dream had haunted her since childhood. She'd wake gasping, convinced she could smell smoke, could feel heat on her skin. And there's a boy, she continued, her voice dropping. A young man, really. He's covered in blood, but still fighting, trying to reach me. But he never does. The fire always swallows him before he can get to me. Then there's an explosion and everything goes dark. Her hands trembled. It's just a nightmare, Your Majesty. I've had it since I was small. It doesn't mean anything. The boy survived. Lysander's voice was rough with emotion, and when Ilara looked up at him, she saw something raw in his expression: pain, guilt, and something that looked like relief. He's sitting before you now. The words didn't make sense. Ilara stared at him, trying to understand, trying to make the pieces fit together. What? Your Majesty, I don't understand. How could you be in my nightmare? That's not possible. It's just a dream, just my mind creating fears out of nothing. But even as she spoke, something in her chest pulled tight. The grey eyes, the shape of his face, the way he moved with absolute certainty even when fighting. She'd seen it all before, in that recurring dream that had plagued her for 15 years. Lysander set the pendant down carefully on the table beside him and stood. He moved to the window, his back to her for a moment, as if gathering himself. 15 years ago, he began, his voice controlled but heavy with history, there was a massacre at this palace. The entire Moonshadow royal family was slaughtered. The king, his queen, their advisors, their guards. It was brutal and coordinated, designed to look like it was caught in the crossfire of a pack war. But it was assassination, pure and calculated. Ilara listened, confused. She vaguely remembered hearing whispers about the Moonshadow family, about the tragedy that had befallen them, but it had always seemed like distant history, nothing to do with her. All except one, Lysander continued, turning to face her. An infant Omega princess, the youngest child, barely old enough to walk. Everyone believed she died in the explosion that destroyed the royal wing. Her body was never found, but no one could have survived that inferno. His eyes locked onto hers. I was 15 years old, a visiting Alpha Air training with your father's elite guard. When the attack came, my commander shoved a bundle into my arms and ordered me to get the princess to safety. There was a hidden passage behind the throne room, one that led out of the palace to the forest beyond. Ilara's breathing had gone shallow. Your Majesty, why are you telling me this? Because I tried. Raw pain filled his voice. I ran through fire and fighting, held that crying infant against my chest, made it to the passage and started down into the darkness. Then the explosion came. The passage collapsed. The force threw me backward, ripped the princess from my arms. I woke days later, told that the princess was dead, that the entire royal line had been exterminated. He moved closer to the bed, his eyes never leaving hers. I failed to save her, or so I thought. But someone got her out of those ruins. Someone hid her, suppressed her royal scent with powerful magic, gave her a new identity, and raised her as a servant. No. Ilara shook her head, pressing back against the pillows. No, that's impossible. I'm just a servant. My mother was a servant. I'm nobody. This is insane. You're not nobody, Ilara. You never were. Lysander's voice was gentle but firm. The woman who raised you saved your life by making you invisible. But I caught your scent tonight in the Grand Court. Wild honeysuckle and moonflower. The signature scent of royal Omega bloodline magic. A scent that shouldn't exist because the Omega royal line was supposed to be dead. Ilara couldn't breathe. This was madness. He was mistaken. She was just a servant who happened to have a pendant and a nightmare, and a scent that reminded him of someone else. But even as she thought it, Something deep inside her stirred, something that felt almost like recognition. "There's one way to know for certain," Lysander said quietly. He began to speak, and the language that emerged from his lips was nothing Alara had ever heard before. Ancient and lyrical, flowing like water and fire combined, words that seemed to resonate in her bones. The old tongue of the Omega royals, words of blessing and protection, phrases that should have meant nothing to a servant girl. But they didn't mean nothing. As the words washed over her, something in Alara's mind cracked open like a dam breaking under pressure. Pain lanced through her skull, sharp and overwhelming. And suddenly she was drowning in memories that weren't supposed to exist. A woman's face, not the kind servant who'd raised her, but someone else. Someone regal and beautiful, with red gold hair like her own, and eyes filled with terror and desperate love. Hands pressing the pendant into her infant grip, the silver warm from the woman's skin. "Remember who you are, my moonflower. Remember." Fire everywhere, screaming, the palace in chaos, wolves fighting wolves, the smell of blood and smoke choking the air, being shoved into darkness, into cold stone passages, the sound of her own crying echoing off walls. An explosion that shook the world, different arms catching her, pulling her from rubble. A servant woman's face, kind but desperate, pressing a hand over her mouth to muffle her cries. "I'll keep you safe, little princess. But you can never tell anyone. Never. Do you understand? If they know you're alive, they'll kill you. You have to forget. You have to become someone else." Magic, old and powerful, wrapping around her mind like gentle chains. The memories fading, being buried deep where they couldn't surface, where they couldn't give her away. A new life, a new name, a new identity as nobody, as nothing, as just another orphan servant who would scrub floors and stay invisible and survive. Ilara gasped, clutching her head as 15 years of suppressed memories forced their way through the protective barrier that had kept them hidden. The pain was excruciating, like her skull was splitting open, like her entire understanding of reality was shattering and reforming into something new and terrifying. Lysander was beside her on the bed immediately, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her. "Breathe. Just breathe. I know it hurts. Let it come." "She wasn't my mother," Ilara choked out, her voice broken and fractured. "The woman who raised me. She wasn't my mother. She saved me, hid me, raised me as her own, loved me like I was hers. And when she died, when the fever took her, she made me promise. Never to tell, never to remember, never to be anything other than what she'd made me." The servant woman had used the last of her strength, the last of her magic, to reinforce the barriers around Ilara's memories, to keep her safe even after death. Tears streamed down Ilara's face. "I don't even remember her real name. I called her Mama, but I don't know who she really was, or why she saved me, or how she knew to hide me." "She was a hero," Lysander said quietly, his hands still steady on her shoulders. "Whoever she was, she saved your life by making you invisible. If anyone had discovered the princess lived, if anyone had caught even a hint of your true identity, you would have been killed immediately." Ilara looked up at him, her vision blurred with tears, her entire world crumbling and rebuilding itself in the space of heartbeats. I was Princess Ilara Moonshadow," Lysander confirmed gently. "Last of your bloodline, rightful heir to the Omega throne of the Northern Kingdom, and I failed to protect you once." His storm-grey eyes held hers, and in them she saw a vow being made. I won't fail again. The fire had burned lower, casting longer shadows across the king's chambers. Elara sat wrapped in a blanket that cost more than she'd earned in her entire life, trying to absorb everything Lysander was telling her about a night she'd lived through but couldn't remember. The attack began just after sunset, he said, his voice measured but heavy with the weight of history. I was in the training yards with the other visiting heirs. We heard the explosions from the east wing, saw the smoke rising. By the time we reached the main palace, it was chaos. He stood by the window now, looking out over the grounds as if he could see that night playing out in the darkness beyond. They weren't random raiders. The attackers were masked, but their movements were too coordinated, too professional. They knew exactly where they were going, straight for the royal family's quarters, ignoring the treasury, ignoring the other nobles. They had a specific target and a specific timeline. Elara listened, trying to imagine it, trying to reconcile the palace she knew, with its quiet corridors and endless routine, with the scene of violence and betrayal he described. They went for your father first, Lysander continued. King Theron was a powerful alpha, one of the strongest in generations. It took 6 attackers to bring him down, and he killed 3 of them before he fell. Your mother fought beside him. Queen Lyris wasn't a warrior, but she fought like one that night. His hands clenched at his sides. I saw their bodies later. They'd positioned themselves between the attackers and the passage to the nursery, bought time for someone to get you out. My commander found me in the chaos, shoved you into my arms. You were crying, terrified, clutching that pendant. He told me about the hidden passage, ordered me to run and not look back. Lysander turned from the window, his eyes meeting hers. So I ran, fought through smoke and fire and wolves who tried to stop me, made it to the throne room, found the hidden entrance behind the tapestry, started down into darkness with you screaming in my arms. Elara could almost see it. The young alpha heir, barely more than a boy himself, trying desperately to save an infant princess in the middle of a massacre. The explosion was precisely placed, he said, his voice rougher now. It wasn't random destruction. Someone had planted charges in that passage specifically to cut off the escape route. The blast brought down tons of stone, and the concussive force threw me backward. You were ripped from my arms. Raw pain crossed his face. I woke up 3 days later in the healer's wing. Broken ribs, burns, head trauma. They told me the passage had completely collapsed, that no one could have survived, that the infant princess was dead along with the rest of her family. He moved closer to where Elara sat. I barely survived myself. Spent months recovering, tormented by nightmares of your cries being cut off by stone and dust, haunted by my failure. But you didn't fail, Elara whispered. I'm here. Because someone else succeeded where I didn't. Someone pulled you from those ruins, hid you, kept you alive. Lysander's expression shifted to something darker. And in the aftermath, I became obsessed with finding who orchestrated it all, who wanted your family dead badly enough to plan such a coordinated attack. He began to pace, the controlled energy of a predator contained in human form. I pushed for investigations, demanded answers. Every lead evaporated like smoke. Every witness died mysteriously before they could testify. The case went cold within months. At 19, I took the throne of my own kingdom after my father's death. But I never forgot the Moonshadow massacre. Never stopped watching for signs, for connections, for anything that might reveal who was behind it. Elara's mind reeled. This wasn't just about her. This was about a conspiracy that had shaped the politics of the Northern Kingdom for 15 years. The pendant, Lysander said, picking it up from the table. It's not just jewelry. It's a magical artifact, keyed specifically to the Omega royal bloodline, designed to amplify your natural gifts, to protect you, to mark you as true royalty. He held it out to her, and Ilara took it with trembling hands. The silver felt warm, almost alive, pulsing gently against her palm. That's why I recognized your scent tonight, even though it was suppressed. Royal Omega magic has a distinctive signature. The woman who hid you was powerful enough to mask it almost completely, but not entirely. Not from someone who'd been that close to you before. Ilara stared at the pendant, at the intricate crest she'd worn for 15 years, without understanding its significance. She saved my life by making me worthless, by making me so invisible that no one would ever look at me twice. She was brilliant, Lysander agreed quietly, and she sacrificed everything to keep you safe. Silence fell between them, heavy with revelation and grief. Ilara felt like she was standing on the edge of a chasm, looking down at a life she'd never known she'd lost. Then a new fear gripped her. You said whoever killed my family is still out there, that they've been here the entire time. Her voice shook. If I'm alive, if they find out, they'll try again, Lysander confirmed grimly, which is why we need to be very careful about who knows you've been discovered. Who did this? Ilara asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. Who wanted my family dead? Lysander's expression darkened. I have a strong suspicion, and he's been in this palace, in a position of power, for decades. He moved to his desk, pulled out a leather-bound folder. Lord Corvain, my uncle, High Counselor and second most powerful wolf in the kingdom. Ilara's eyes widened. She'd seen Lord Corvain before, from a distance. A distinguished older wolf with silver hair and an air of absolute authority, respected, trusted, the king's own blood. He's your uncle. Surely he wouldn't— I've never had proof, Lysander said, spreading documents across the desk. But the signs were always there. Corvain believed Omega royalty was a weakness. He thought only alphas should rule, that Omega magic was too gentle, too focused on nurturing and protecting rather than conquering and dominating. He pointed to one document. Your family was planning to formalize a governance structure that gave Omega's actual political power. Equal representation, equal voice in decisions that affected the kingdom. It was revolutionary, he continued, and Corvain fought it publicly, argued against it in council, was overruled by your father and the other allied kingdoms. Lysander's finger moved to another page. 3 months later, the massacre happened. The timeline was damning even without concrete proof. In the aftermath, Corvain led the investigation. He was the one who declared every lead a dead end, who ensured that no real answers were ever found, who made certain the case went cold and stayed cold. Ilara felt sick. And no one suspected him? He was grieving, or seemed to be. He'd lost his king, his allies. He positioned himself as the faithful servant, trying and failing to bring justice. Lysander's voice hardened. But I've watched him for years. Watched him consolidate power, position his allies, slowly reshape the kingdom's politics to favor alphas over all other designations. He's been waiting, Lysander said quietly. Waiting for me to produce an heir. Then he could eliminate both of us and take the throne himself. A temporary regency that would become permanent. The scope of the conspiracy made Ilara's head spin. And now? Now you exist. Lysander looked at her intently. You're not just a survivor, Ilara. You're the rightful heir to the Moonshadow throne. Our kingdoms were to be united through alliance, a partnership between Alpha and Omega royalty that would have reshaped power structures across the realm. Your existence threatens everything Corvain has worked toward for 15 years. You're proof that his massacre failed. You're proof that Omega royalty still lives. And you're a direct threat to his plans. Fear coursed through Alara's veins. So what do we do? We need proof before we move against him, Lysander said. He's too entrenched, too powerful, has too many allies. If we accuse him without evidence, he'll turn the kingdom against us, paint you as a fraud, and me as a fool who fell for a servant's tricks. But if he even suspects you're alive, if he has any hint that I've discovered who you really are... The door burst open. One of Lysander's guards stumbled through, bloodied and desperate, his face pale with shock and fear. Your Majesty! Lord Corvain's men, they're coming! Lysander moved instantly, pushing Ilara behind him and drawing a blade from a concealed sheath at his back. How many? 6, Your Majesty. Armed. Professional. They're demanding entrance to your chambers, saying they have intelligence about a security threat. A threat they created, Lysander snarled. He looked back at Ilara, his eyes fierce. Stay behind me. Do not move from that position, no matter what happens. The door slammed open again, and 6 wolves burst through. They wore the uniform of palace guards, but something in their movements spoke of military training beyond the normal standards. Professional soldiers, not regular palace security. Their eyes locked immediately onto Ilara, confirming what Lysander had feared. Corvain already knew. Someone in the palace had reported her scent, her presence in the king's chambers, and the High Counselor had moved with terrifying speed. Stand down, Lysander commanded, his voice dropping to that alpha register that demanded obedience. But these wolves didn't obey. They drew their weapons, advancing with coordinated precision. Lord Corvain sends his regards, one of them said, his voice flat and professional. The pretender must be eliminated. Lysander didn't waste breath on further warnings. He moved like lightning, his blade flashing in the firelight. The first attacker went down before he'd fully registered the king's movement, throat cut cleanly. The fight that erupted was brutal and efficient. Lysander was a trained warrior, a king who'd earned his throne through strength as much as birthright. He cut through the second attacker with a combination of blade work and raw alpha power that sent the wolf crashing into the wall. But they were skilled too, and they had numbers. 3 of them engaged Lysander directly while one broke away, heading straight for Ilara. She pressed herself against the wall, terror freezing her limbs. The wolf approaching her had cold eyes and a poisoned blade, the kind designed to kill quickly and painfully. Nothing personal, he said, raising the weapon. Just business. Ilara threw her hands up instinctively, a desperate defensive gesture born of pure fear rather than any conscious thought. The magic that erupted from her palms was like nothing she'd ever experienced. Silver blue light, bright and powerful, exploded outward in a protective barrier. The attacking wolf was caught mid-lunge, thrown backward by the force as if he'd run into a solid wall. He crashed into the far side of the chamber and crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Everyone froze. The remaining attackers stared at Ilara in shock, at the fading silver-blue light still crackling around her hands, at the proof of royal Omega magic, undeniable and powerful. Lysander used their distraction ruthlessly. He cut down 2 more in rapid succession, their shock making them slow, vulnerable. The last attacker turned to run, but Lysander was faster. He slammed the wolf against the wall, blade at his throat. "Who sent you? I want to hear you say it." The captured wolf struggled, then spat blood. "Lord Corvain pays us well. Said there was a pretender claiming royal blood. Said she had to die before she could spread her lies." "Lies," Lysander repeated, his voice deadly quiet. He glanced back at Ilara, at the evidence of her power still fading in the air around her. "Does that look like a lie to you?" The wolf's eyes widened with realization and fear. True royal bloodline magic couldn't be faked. Everyone knew that. Lysander knocked him unconscious with the hilt of his blade and turned to Ilara. She stood against the wall, shaking, staring at her own hands as if they belonged to someone else. "That was royal Omega magic," he said gently, moving toward her carefully. "Defensive, protective. It emerges in moments of extreme danger, when your life or the lives of those you care about are threatened." Ilara looked up at him, her eyes wide and terrified. "I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know I could do anything." "Your magic was suppressed along with your memories," Lysander explained. "But the barrier is breaking down. The more you remember, the more your power returns." He knelt beside the unconscious attacker she'd thrown. "This is undeniable proof, Ilara. Royal blood doesn't lie. That kind of power can't be faked or learned. You were born with it." Ilara slid down the wall, her legs giving out. She'd gone from servant to princess, to target all in the span of hours, and now she'd used magic she didn't know she possessed to save her own life. "He knows," she whispered. "Corvain knows I'm alive." "Yes," Lysander agreed grimly. He moved to the door, spoke quickly to his loyal guards, who'd arrived moments too late to help. "Secure these bodies. Get the live one to the holding cells. Double the guard on this wing. No one enters without my direct permission." He returned to Ilara, offering his hand. "We don't have the luxury of time anymore. Corvain has shown his hand by sending assassins. That means he's desperate, worried we might have enough proof to move against him." Ilara took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. "Do we have enough proof?" "We have a captured assassin who'll confess under questioning. We have your magic, which proves your bloodline beyond doubt. We have the pendant, your memories, your scent." Lysander's jaw set with determination. "It's not everything, but it's a start." He looked at her seriously. "But I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it." Ilara waited, her heart still pounding from the attack, from the magic, from everything. "I can help you disappear," Lysander said quietly. "New identity, safe location far from here, enough resources to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You could walk away from all of this, from the danger, from the politics, from the burden of your birthright." He held her gaze. "Or you can stay, fight with me, help expose Corvain's conspiracy, reclaim your family's legacy. But if you stay, it will be dangerous. He'll try again, and he'll be more careful next time. There will be political battles, skeptics who question your claim despite the proof, wolves loyal to Corvain who'll oppose you at every turn." Lysander's expression softened. "I'm not asking you to choose revenge. I'm offering you a choice your family never had, the choice to decide your own path." Ilara stared at him, overwhelmed. Freedom or justice, safety or truth, a life of her own or a fight for something bigger than herself. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "I want you to do what's right for you," Lysander said simply. Not for me, not for political strategy, not even for your family's memory. For you, Elara. What do you want? No one had ever asked her that before. In her entire life, no one had cared what she wanted. Take time, he added. Think, rest, recover from tonight. I'll support whatever you decide. He moved toward the door, giving her space, but paused at the threshold. There's a memorial garden in the East Wing. Your family is commemorated there. If you want to visit, to think, I can have guards escort you tomorrow. Then he was gone, leaving Elara alone with the weight of an impossible choice and the ghost of magic still tingling in her hands. The interrogation room was deep in the palace dungeons, where stone walls swallowed sound and torchlight had barely penetrated the darkness. Lysander stood with his arms crossed, watching as his most trusted guard questioned the assassin who'd survived the attack on his chambers. The wolf was bound to a chair, bruised and bloodied, but conscious. His eyes held the resignation of someone who knew his fate was already sealed. Last chance, the guard said, his voice echoing off the stone. Who hired you? The assassin spat blood onto the floor, then lifted his head with something almost like defiance. Lord Corvain pays us well, has for years. This time he said there was a pretender claiming royal blood. Said she had to die before she could spread lies and destabilize the kingdom. Lysander's expression remained controlled, but the air in the room grew heavy with barely contained alpha power. When did he give the order? Hours after the girl collapsed in the Grand Court. Someone reported an unusual scent in the king's chambers. Corvain moved fast, said it had to be done immediately before you could move her somewhere more secure. The confirmation settled like ice in Lysander's chest. Corvain had spies throughout the palace, watchers who reported directly to him. The moment Elara's suppressed royal scent had been detected, the High Counselor had acted with terrifying efficiency. How many more? Lysander asked quietly. The assassin hesitated, then seemed to make a calculation about his own survival. 6 teams, 30 wolves total, all professionals. Some are palace guards loyal to Corvain. Others are mercenaries like us. 30 assassins, and this was just the first wave. Lysander's jaw tightened. Names. I'll give you everything, the assassin said quickly, sensing an opportunity. Names, positions, payment records, everything I know, in exchange for my life. Lysander studied him for a long moment. You tried to murder an innocent woman on the orders of a traitor. Your life is forfeit. But cooperate fully, Batits, and your death will be quick and painless, rather than drawn out over days. The assassin's face went pale, but he nodded. He understood the game. This was the best offer he would receive. Start talking, the guard said, pulling out parchment and ink. Lysander left them to it, climbing back up to the palace proper. His mind raced with strategy and contingencies. One assassin's confession would help, but it wouldn't be enough to move against Corvain publicly. The High Counselor was too entrenched, had too many allies among the nobility. They needed more evidence, more testimony, more proof that even Corvain's supporters couldn't dismiss. But that would take time, and time was a luxury they no longer had. He made his way to the chambers where Elara had been moved after the attack, more secure than his own rooms. With guards, he'd personally selected standing watch outside. Men who'd served with him for years, whose loyalty was beyond question. Inside, he found Dr. Theron checking on his patient. Elara sat on the edge of an ornate bed, looking small and exhausted despite the luxury surrounding her. Her hands were bandaged where she'd scraped them during the fight, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. "How is she?" Lysander asked quietly. Dr. Theron glanced at Ilara, then at the king. "Physically, she'll recover. The magic manifestation drained her significantly, but that's normal for an untrained Omega using power for the first time. With rest and proper nutrition, her strength will return. And otherwise," the physician's expression grew more concerned. "She's in shock, Your Majesty. Her entire understanding of reality has been shattered in less than a day. The human mind can only process so much trauma before it begins to fracture." Lysander moved closer to the bed. Ilara looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge, too much fear, too much weight for someone who'd been scrubbing floors just yesterday. "Royal Omega magic is defensive and protective," Dr. Theron explained, addressing them both. "It emerges in moments of extreme danger, when the Omega's life or the lives of those they care about are threatened. The fact that Princess Ilara manifested such power proves her bloodline beyond any doubt. That kind of magic cannot be faked or learned. You're born with it or you're not." The title, Princess Ilara, made her flinch slightly. She still wasn't used to it, still couldn't quite believe it was real. "The power will grow stronger as she trains," the physician continued, "as she learns to control it, rather than simply reacting in crisis. The Omega royal line was known for creating shields that could protect entire battalions, for healing magic that could save lives that should have been lost." He packed his supplies carefully. "But that will take time and proper instruction. For now, she needs rest." After Dr. Theron departed, Lysander sat in the chair across from the bed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "The assassin confessed," he finally said. "Corvain ordered the hit within hours of your collapse. He has spies throughout the palace who reported your scent to him immediately." Ilara's hands twisted in the silk blanket. "So he knows I'm alive? Knows what I am?" "Yes." "Which means we can't wait much longer to move against him." Lysander leaned forward, his expression serious. "But I need to be honest with you about something." She waited, watching him with those eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. "We still need more evidence to move against him publicly. One assassin's word won't be enough to convince the noble houses to turn against the High Counselor. Corvain has spent decades building alliances, positioning his supporters, making himself indispensable to the kingdom's governance." "What are you saying?" Ilara asked quietly. "I'm saying this will be a long fight. Dangerous. You'll be a target for as long as Corvain remains free. Even with my protection, even with the best guards I can provide, you won't be safe." Lysander held her gaze. "I won't let them take you again. I swear it on my life and my throne, but I also won't lie to you about the risks." Ilara absorbed this, her fingers finding the pendant that now hung openly around her neck. "You said I had a choice, to stay or to disappear. You do. That hasn't changed." "Has it?" She looked at him directly. "If I leave now, Corvain wins. He gets away with murdering my family, with 15 years of conspiracy. He keeps his power and his position, and someday he'll make another move for your throne." "That's my problem to solve," Lysander said. "Not yours. You didn't ask for any of this. Neither did my parents." Her voice was soft but firm. "Neither did the woman who saved me and raised me and died protecting a secret she never told anyone." She stood, moving to the window. The sun was rising over the palace ground, casting everything in gold and shadow. "I need to see something," Ilara said. "The memorial garden, where my family is remembered." Lysander studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll take you myself." The memorial garden occupied a quiet corner of the palace grounds, surrounded by high hedges that created a sense of sacred privacy. Ancient trees provided shade, and carefully tended flowers bloomed in arrangements of white and silver, the traditional colors of mourning. Lysander led Ilara along a stone path to the section dedicated to fallen royalty. Monuments and plaques marked the final resting places or commemorations of kings and queens, princes and princesses who'd served and protected the Northern Kingdom over centuries. The Moonshadow Monument was simple but elegant, white marble carved with the family crest, listing three names in flowing script: King Theron Moonshadow, Queen Lyris Moonshadow, Princess Ilara Moonshadow. Below the last name, in smaller letters, believed deceased. Ilara stood before the stone, staring at her own name carved into marble. A memorial to someone who wasn't dead, who'd been scrubbing floors and hiding in plain sight for 15 years while the kingdom mourned her. The memories were clearer now, no longer suppressed by protective magic. Her mother's face, beautiful and kind, with red gold hair like her own. Her father's laugh, deep and warm, filling their private chambers with joy, the feeling of being held, being loved, being safe. And then fire, screaming. Her mother shoving her into a servant's arms, pressing the pendant into her tiny hands. "Remember who you are, my moonflower. Remember." But she hadn't remembered. She'd forgotten completely, become someone else entirely, believed herself to be nobody while her family lay dead and unavenged. Grief hit her like a physical blow. Not the abstract sadness of losing people she couldn't remember, but real, devastating loss for parents who'd loved her, who'd died protecting her, who'd given her a chance at life even as their own were stolen. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the stone. "I'm sorry I forgot you. I'm sorry I didn't know who I was. I'm sorry it took so long." She thought of the servant woman too, the one who'd pulled her from the rubble and hidden her away, who'd used the last of her magic to suppress Ilara's memories and royal scent, who'd raised her with love and kindness despite the danger, despite the sacrifice required. Two mothers, both had loved her, both had protected her, both deserved justice. For the first time since the memories had returned, Ilara felt something besides fear and confusion. She felt anger, real, burning rage at what had been stolen from all of them. Not just her life and her identity, but her parents' lives, their dreams for a kingdom where Omegas had power and voice. The servant woman's sacrifice and her years of fear and vigilance. All of it destroyed by one man's ambition and hatred. Ilara removed the pendant from around her neck and placed it carefully on the monument, the royal crest gleaming in the morning sunlight. "I won't let them get away with this," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "I won't let your deaths mean nothing. I promise you that." The choice crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. Not for power, though reclaiming her birthright was part of it. Not for revenge, though she wanted Corvain to face justice. But for truth. For the principle that the powerful shouldn't be allowed to murder and conspire without consequence. "I'm staying." She turned to find Lysander standing several paces back, giving her privacy, but close enough to provide support if needed. He'd been watching, she realized, waiting for her decision. "Not because I want to be a princess," Ilara continued, moving toward him. "I don't know how to be royal. I don't know court politics or proper etiquette or any of the things I'm supposed to know. But my family believed in justice. They believed in protecting the vulnerable. They died for those beliefs." She met his storm-grey eyes without flinching. "And maybe if I fight now, if we expose what Corvain did, we can stop it from happening to someone else. Maybe we can make their deaths mean something." Something shifted in Lysander's expression. Relief, pride, and something deeper that he didn't name. "Are you certain? Once we move forward publicly, there's no going back to anonymity, no safety in obscurity." "I'm certain." And she was. For the first time in her life, Ilara felt absolutely sure of her path. Lysander nodded slowly. "Then we do this properly, with proof that can't be dismissed, with testimony that can't be ignored, with evidence that will convince even Corvain's allies to turn against him." "How long will that take?" "Days, maybe a week. The assassin is giving us names and details. We'll move quietly, gathering statements, building an unassailable case." His jaw set with determination. "And then we call a formal court assembly and lay it all out publicly." "He'll know it's coming," Ilara said. "He'll try to stop us." "He'll try. We'll be ready." Lysander gestured back toward the palace. "But first, we need to prepare you. If you're going to stand before the court and claim your birthright, you need to look the part." Over the next 3 days, Ilara's world transformed with dizzying speed. She was moved to chambers befitting a princess, with silk gowns and proper attendants. But Lysander had chosen her servants carefully, selecting kind women who treated her with respect, rather than the cruelty she'd known in the lower palace. She learned to walk differently, to speak with confidence rather than submission, to meet the eyes of nobles rather than keeping her gaze on the floor. It felt foreign and uncomfortable, but she forced herself to adapt. Dr. Theron worked with her on controlling her magic, teaching her to summon the protective barriers consciously rather than only in crisis. The power was there, stronger each day as the suppression magic fully dissolved, but controlling it took practice and focus. And Lysander kept her informed of everything. The assassin had given them 32 names, including 6 nobles who'd been part of Corvain's conspiracy from the beginning. Guards loyal to the king were quietly arresting co-conspirators, building a web of testimony that all pointed back to the High Counselor. Corvain knew something was happening. He had to. But he couldn't move openly without exposing himself, couldn't order more attacks without confirming his guilt. It was a waiting game, and the tension built with each passing hour. On the 4th morning, Lysander came to Ilara's chambers with purpose in his stride. "It's time. I've called a formal court assembly for this afternoon. Every noble house, every high-ranking official required attendance." Ilara's heart raced. "Does Corvain know what it's about?" "No, but he'll attend anyway. His absence would be suspicious, and he's arrogant enough to believe he can handle whatever accusations we bring." Lysander moved closer, his expression serious. "This is your last chance to change your mind. Once we do this, there's no going back." "I know." Ilara took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm ready." The great hall was filled to capacity when they arrived. Nobles in their finest attire, officials in formal dress, guards lining the walls. The massive space buzzed with speculation and whispered theories about why the king had called such an urgent assembly. Lord Corvain stood among the other high-ranking nobles, looking distinguished and confident in silver and black. His expression showed mild curiosity, but no fear, no concern. He believed himself untouchable. Ilara waited in an antechamber, wearing a gown of deep blue embroidered with silver thread. The pendant hung visibly around her neck, the royal crest catching the light. Her red-gold hair was arranged in a style befitting royalty rather than hidden beneath a servant's cap. She looked like a princess, She felt terrified. Lysander appeared beside her, resplendent in his formal royal attire. Remember, you're not just claiming a title. You're bearing witness to truth. That's all you need to do. She nodded, not trusting her voice. I'll make the introduction. Then you enter and let them see you. The pendant, your appearance, your scent, it will all speak for itself before you say a word. The great hall fell silent as Lysander strode to the raised platform at the far end. His presence commanded attention, alpha power radiating from him in waves. Members of the court, nobles of the realm, honored guests, he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the massive space. I have called you here today to witness the revelation of a truth that has been hidden for 15 years. A truth that will reshape everything we believed about the Moonshadow massacre. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Corvain's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. 15 years ago, we mourned the deaths of our allies and friends. King Theron Moonshadow, Queen Lyris Moonshadow, and their infant daughter, Princess Ilara. We believed the entire royal line had been exterminated, that Omega royalty had been wiped from our world. Lysander paused, letting the tension build. We were wrong. He gestured toward the entrance where Ilara waited. I present to you Princess Ilara Moonshadow, rightful heir to the Omega throne, survivor of the massacre, returned to us after 15 years of being hidden in plain sight. Ilara stepped into the hall, and the effect was immediate and dramatic. Gasps echoed off the stone walls. Nobles surged forward for a better look. Guards straightened to attention, and Lord Corvain's face went pale as death. She walked forward with as much grace as she could manage, heading toward the platform where Lysander stood. Every eye in the hall followed her progress. She could feel the weight of their stares, their shock, their disbelief. When she reached the platform, Lysander held up the pendant. This is the royal artifact of the Moonshadow line, a magical item keyed specifically to their bloodline. It cannot be worn or used by anyone not of true royal descent. He handed it to Ilara, and as her fingers closed around it, the pendant began to glow with soft silver light. The magic responded to her touch, to her bloodline, in a way that couldn't be faked or forced. The hall erupted in shocked murmurs. We also have testimony from Dr. Theron, who served the Moonshadow family and can confirm Princess Ilara's identity through medical examination and her manifestation of royal Omega magic. The elderly physician stepped forward, bowing to Ilara before addressing the court. I examined the princess personally. Her magical signature, her physical characteristics, everything confirms her bloodline. Royal Omega magic cannot be learned or imitated. She is who she claims to be. Lysander's expression hardened. But the question remains. How did an infant princess survive a coordinated massacre? How did she remain hidden for 15 years? And most importantly, who orchestrated the attack that murdered her family? He pulled out a stack of documents. Over the past week, we have gathered testimony from 32 conspirators. Assassins, corrupt guards, paid informants. All of them tell the same story. All of them name the same man as the architect of the Moonshadow massacre. Corvain finally moved, stepping forward with manufactured outrage. Your Majesty, surely you're not suggesting that I had anything to do with that tragedy. I led the investigation. I sought justice for our fallen allies. You led the investigation to nowhere, Lysander countered. You ensured every lead went cold. Every witness died before they could testify. You covered your own tracks while pretending to seek truth. He gestured to the guards. Lord Corvain, You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit regicide, for the murder of King Theron and Queen Lyris Moonshadow, for the attempted murder of Princess Elara Moonshadow, and for treason against the crown." Guards moved forward, but Corvain held up a hand, his expression twisting into something ugly. "This is absurd. You expect the court to believe that a servant girl is a lost princess? That I, who have served this kingdom faithfully for decades, orchestrated a massacre based on the word of hired killers?" "Not just their word," Lysander said calmly. "We have financial records showing payments from your personal accounts to known assassins. We have testimony from nobles who were present at meetings where you argued against Omega political power. We have the timing of the massacre, 3 months after you were overruled on the Moonshadow Alliance proposal." He held up another document. "And we have the confession of the assassins you sent to kill Princess Elara 4 days ago, the ones who attacked her in my private chambers." Corvain's mask of confidence cracked. "She's a fraud, a servant who stumbled onto a pendant and spun a pretty story. You're being played, Your Majesty, by a girl who wants power she has no right to claim." Elara had remained silent until now, letting the evidence speak for itself. But something in Corvain's dismissive tone, in his attempt to reduce her to nothing, sparked the anger she'd felt at the memorial garden. She stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "I don't remember everything about my family, Lord Corvain. The woman who saved me used magic to suppress my memories, to keep me safe from people like you who wanted me dead." The hall fell silent, everyone straining to hear. "But I remember enough. I remember that my parents believed in justice. They believed in protecting the vulnerable, in giving voice to those who'd been silenced. They died for those beliefs." Elara's hands clenched at her sides. "And you killed them because you couldn't stand the thought of Omegas having actual power. Because your hatred and ambition mattered more than their lives." She looked directly at Corvain, meeting his eyes without fear. "Someone in this room orchestrated their murder. Someone spent 15 years covering their tracks, consolidating power, planning to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. And I will see them brought to justice." "You're just a servant," Corvain spat, his composure finally breaking completely. "You're nothing. You'll always be nothing." "I'm a survivor," Elara said quietly. "And that's everything." Lysander nodded to his guards. "Take him to the holding cells and bring in the conspirators who've agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences." As Corvain was dragged away, still protesting his innocence, 6 nobles stepped forward. Members of his inner circle who'd been part of the conspiracy from the beginning. Faced with the evidence against them, they'd chosen cooperation over execution. One by one, they confirmed the story. The meetings where Corvain had raged against Omega political power, the planning sessions for the massacre, the payments to professional killers, the cover-up that followed. It took hours for all the testimony to be heard, but by the end, no one in the Great Hall could doubt the truth. The conspiracy was real. Corvain was guilty, and the servant girl wearing the royal pendant was exactly who she claimed to be. 6 months later, Elara stood in the Grand Court, where she'd once collapsed from exhaustion. But she wasn't scrubbing the floors anymore. She wore a gown of deep green, the pendant gleaming at her throat, and she walked through the space with confidence she'd never imagined possessing. The investigation had concluded swiftly once Corvain's allies began turning on each other. The former High Counselor and 3 of his closest co-conspirators had been convicted of treason and murder, sentenced to life imprisonment in the deepest dungeons of the realm. Justice, Elara had learned, wasn't the same as revenge. It was slower, more deliberate, but ultimately more satisfying. She hadn't claimed her family's throne. That had surprised many in the court, but Ilara had been firm in her decision. She didn't want to rule a kingdom she barely understood. What she wanted was to make the kind of changes her parents had believed in, to honor their legacy by protecting others the way they'd tried to protect her. So she'd accepted the position of royal ambassador for Omega rights, working directly with Lysander to reform the laws that had allowed servants like her to be abused and exploited. New protections for workers, new limits on labor hours, new representation in court for Omegas who'd never had political voice before. The work was hard, often frustrating, but it felt right. It felt like purpose. Her relationship with Lysander had deepened over the months, evolving from protector and protected into something that resembled partnership. Maybe someday it would become more, but for now, the mutual respect and growing affection was enough. She still had nightmares sometimes, still struggled with feeling royal enough, worthy enough, strong enough for the role she'd taken on. But Dr. Theron assured her that healing took time, that no one expected her to transform overnight from servant to princess. Every week, Ilara visited the memorial garden. She brought flowers, sat beside the monument, and told her parents about the changes she was making, about the laws being passed, the servants being protected, the future they'd dreamed of slowly becoming real. Today, after leaving the memorial, she made her way back to the Grand Court, the space where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. She paused at the exact spot where she'd collapsed 6 months ago, where exhaustion had finally claimed her and set everything in motion. Ilara knelt, placing her hand on the cold marble. The stone was smooth under her palm, polished to perfection by servants who no longer had to work 17-hour days to keep it that way. A smile crossed her face, small but genuine. "Thank you for breaking," she whispered to her past self, to the girl who'd been worked to collapse, to the princess who'd survived by becoming invisible. "It's how I found out I could rebuild." Then she stood, straightened her gown, and walked out of the Grand Court with her head held high. Not invisible anymore, not a servant, not quite comfortable being a princess yet, but herself. Finally, completely herself. And that was enough.